Department of Commerce Secretary Ross and Department of the Interior Zinke, letting them know that we're not going to stand for any intrusion in our national marine sanctuary and our national marine sanctuaries. As I co-signed those letters and I co-authored those legislation with, co-sponsored that legislation with a number of other representatives. And, you know, for instance, when they had that period, that review period, they initially limited the review period for the sanctuary, for our sanctuaries, to just 30 days. We wrote letters to them. Well, first of all, we got it out to everybody saying we need that input on how important our sanctuaries are to the Central Coast and to our environment. Get that word out. But then we also wrote to the Department of the Interior and Department of Commerce, letting them know that it's not 30 days. Normally, it's 90 days. And fortunately, they gave us an extension. And I think we're still in that extension period where you can write the Department of Commerce, write the Department of Interior, and let them know how important our sanctuaries are. And so it's just continuing to let our voices be heard, that they are not going to take away what's so important to us. They're not going to infringe on our environment, especially here on the Central Coast of California. And I will be the stalwart fighter when it comes to that. That's what I said in the campaign, and I think I've proven that based on my actions in the House of Representatives, and I will continue to do that. You should know that your Northern California representation, your Southern California representation, for the most part, the representatives in the House understand how important the environment is, and you have a good group here that's going to lead the charge.
Thank you, Congressman. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Congressman Panetta, for being here. I'm Mary Butcher from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies, here with a student. And I want to thank you for representing our students, our immigrants, all concerned citizens on the Central Coast, for the environment, for our marine sanctuary, and for just representing our beautiful community. My question is, we were just looking and researching how many bills there are currently on the House of Representative floor. So I'm wondering, which ones do you specifically think you can
dissatisfied with the dysfunction in Washington, D.C. And fortunately, I believe that I understood going into that I had a good sense of what it takes to get things done. And it does take relationships with fellow members, Democrats and Republicans, to get things done. But I can tell you, it is difficult. But it's not going to stop me. Okay, let me just give you a quick story about that. New member orientation. The week after we get elected, we go back to Washington, D.C., the freshman class. About 23 Democrats, about 27, 28 Republicans. We get back there, and immediately at the new member orientation, Democrats are put over to one side, Republicans are put over to the other. And it was for these 2 weeks where we were in Washington, D.C., that we started to get a little itchy, we started to get a little cranky. What is going on here? We want to get to know the other side. We want to make sure that we start to build these relationships with the other side. It wasn't until we left those 2 weeks, we left Washington, D.C., went up to Harvard University at the JFK School of Government, where they had a symposium for the new members, where Democrats and Republican freshman members started to talk to one another. And we started to listen to one another, and we started to get to know one another, so much so that we ended up kicking the leadership out of the room. And we actually sat down and we had a discussion. And we basically realized that both sides have been hearing the same thing. And that's people want us to go to Washington, D.C., one, to get something done, and two, to do it together. Let me tell you, Democrats and I can tell you that there is amongst the younger members You are seeing that desire to work across the aisle because of that. There are a number of bipartisan caucuses that I've actually strived to be on because I know how important that is. The first one I'm on, I'm glad to say, and what I mean bipartisan caucuses, they're purely bipartisan. The same number of Republicans, the same number of Democrats. In order to get on as a Democrat, I needed a Republican to get on with me. The first one I joined was the Climate Solutions Caucus. That's where we have we're about 20 Democrats and 20 Republicans who are there to actually talk about climate solutions and climate change. And it's refreshing to see both parties at the table discussing the options of what we can do. I was fortunate enough that it was funny because the first member I asked to join was from Florida. And he said, oh, yeah, sure, I'm looking into that. Get back to me. So I had my staff reach out to his staff, didn't hear anything. I called him again, didn't hear anything. Finally, my staff said, oh no, his staff said he's not willing to do it at this point. So I thought about it, and I knew that there was a freshman Republican from Norfolk in Virginia, and I've known that they have some rising sea level issues there. And I know that he represents the Navy base, and therefore rising sea levels is not just a community issue, it's a national security issue. And I talked to him. And at first he was a little hesitant, and he said, okay, yeah, have our staffs talk. And so one time I let my staff reach out to him, and we didn't hear back, and I said, stop, I'm going to contact him on the floor. So I went to the other side of the aisle, I contacted and I talked to him, he joined with me. And so that's what it takes. That's what it takes. Look, it's common sense. It's common sense. It's basic human relationships that unfortunately can get lost amongst the partisanship. Another group I'm on is this Tuesday morning group where you have about 8 Republicans and 8 Democrats coming to the table talking about future legislation during that week, what the votes are, kind of getting a sense of where each side's going to come down on these votes, and then also talking about possible legislation that we have that maybe we can garner bipartisan support. And then the third group I'm a part of, once again, these are purely, same number of Democrats, same number of Republicans, is a Problem Solvers Caucus, where basically we are looking to come up with issues, come up with solutions to certain issues. And one of the outlines that we put forward has to deal with the Affordable Care Act. Once we saw the debacle of what happened in the Senate, we basically realized that it's time that Democrats and Republicans need to start working together on this issue. And we came up with a few solutions, and I'll go into that a little later, but a few solutions, just principles that we can put forward that this group of 22 Democrats and 22 Republicans actually can kind of agree on. And that maybe in the necessary committees of jurisdiction, maybe they should be looking at that. And since we put that forward, we've had a number of senators talking about that, a number of senators coming together, reaching out to our chairs, and basically wanting to work with us. I know you're kind of going, well, this is how it should work. I get it, but it hasn't been working like that. And so that's why I've made it a point to make that effort across the aisle. That's how I saw it done. You know, I was fortunate enough to spend some time interning back in Washington, D.C. And I lived with my father when he was the U.S. representative here. And it was a time where, you know, Democrats and Republicans worked together. And it was a time where my father and his 3 roommates, who were all Democrats, it was George Miller, Marty Russo, and Chuck Schumer was on the fold-out couch, and my father and I shared a full-size bed on the living room floor. Full-size, not queen or king, full-size. And I was interning at the State Department. I'd get out of the State Department, I'd go up to Capitol Hill, and we'd all go out to dinner. And it was Democrats and Republicans who would go out to dinner, get to know one another, talk with one another, be friends with one another, show respect with one another. And as John McCain said in his speech, have trust with one another. It's basic, but it hasn't been seen, I think, in a little bit. And now I honestly believe that we're bringing it back, and I'm proud to be a part of that.
Thank you. Shifting to this side, yes, sir, in the red shirt, and the woman in the green behind him. Please join that microphone back where Emmanuel is.
Testing. Can you hear me?
Oh.
Testing, testing.
Okay, good evening. One question that I have, it's concerning campaign financing. And I was wondering, instead of using campaign money for robocalls, negative ads, and mailings, if it might be better to use that money to fund civic activities that are inexpensive, yet improve our communities, and let everyone know that the Democrat Party, the Republican Party, or any other party that cares about the middle class and the lower socioeconomic communities is basically behind these activities, and that if the party, even if they're not elected, that they can still do something instead of trying to go to Washington and get it to filter down from the top. That way, if the Russians ever hack the party's emails, what they'll see is that they'll see that that party actually, they'll report, oh boy, the Democrats, they're running after school programs. The Democrats are cleaning up, they're cleaning up the beaches, they're running kids' soccer leagues, etc. And that way, everybody will know that the party can actually do something, even if they're not elected, and do it very directly.
The transition from campaign financing to actual practical results.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, no, look.
Is that possible?
Look, I think it is. Right now, as we've all heard of the Citizens United decision, and what that means is that outside organizations can contribute as much money as they want under the guise of free speech. That's what the Supreme Court said in Citizens United. And so the Democrats, as much as they want to do all those things, they got to get into the majority. In order to get into the majority, they're going to have to contend with Republican super PACs like the Koch brothers that are putting forward millions and millions and millions of money. We saw what happened in the Georgia 6 election this past, I guess, 2 months ago maybe by now. $50 million spent on that election. Over 20 by the Democratic side. I agree with you. It's unfortunate. And I wish that, and I hope that Citizens United gets overturned. But at this point, in order to actually do something on that, Democrats need to get in the majority. Democrats need to make sure that we have enough money to do the hopefully positive advertising, not negative advertising, but positive advertising in these campaigns to compete with Republicans who are putting forward these super PACs. So Democrats have to contend as well. It's unfortunate. I don't like it. I think it's ugly. And hopefully, if the Democrats do get into the majority, they can pass legislation. The last thing I would want to do, but it might, if this is what we have to do, is a constitutional amendment basically overturning Citizens United and talking about campaign finance reform. I don't want to. I'm averse to messing with the Constitution, but I think in order to basically do something, especially on that issue, I can understand that that's where we're going to.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, howdy.
Hi. If you don't mind, if you guys should just say your name and where you're from, what part of the Central Coast you're from, if you're from Central Coast.
Oh, hi. My name's Deirdre Whitley, and I live in Seaside.
Great.
And it was a very quick drive here.
Yeah, good.
And I'm really troubled by the fact that Trump announced over Twitter the banning of transgender troops. Yeah. As a veteran myself, you learn that there's all manner of people out there, and they're very good soldiers. I was in the Army. I was in the Army during the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and some of the people did have concerns about it, but a lot of their comments about integrating openly gay troops reminded me of comments people used to make about integrating black and white soldiers. And so I kind of feel like it's a lot of the same commentary just wrapped up again, and I'm uncomfortable with these people. Is there any legislation coming forward that might protect transgender troops in the future and their right to serve?
Yeah. Thank you for that question.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Ms. Whitley, and thank you for bringing a future participant in our democracy. That's wonderful to see. Look, I think you're spot on in the sense that, and this was one of my arguments I made when I spoke about this topic. For the past 70 years, our U.S. military has gotten more and more diverse. Yet at the same time, they've become one of the best militaries in the world. Transgender, gender, race, mixing, the diversity has not hurt our military. It's only helped our military. And I believe it's not about basically, if you can fight, if you can serve, then you deserve to be a part of our military. And I think that's important. Look, let me give you a stat. The U.S. military spends $8 million at this point on dealing with transgender medical operations or medical help for transgender people. $8 million. Erectile dysfunction, $80 million. Viagra, of that $80 million, $40 million. Look, if we can do that, I think and basically transgender people want to serve, and they can fight, and they can represent our country just like most people, then they deserve the proper medical care and the proper medical benefits. This tweet stemmed from someone in the majority putting forward an amendment that basically banned medical care for transgender troops. And so we had a big fight about it, and fortunately, it didn't pass. Democrats and Republicans voted it down. And so they understand how important it is for all people to serve in our military.
So the answer is it's legislative, and you took that action.
Exactly.
Two from the upper quadrant up there. Yes, the lady in the red shirt and the gentleman in the white hat. I think it's a gentleman in a white hat. Yes, ma'am. I can see you right there with your hand up. Come down to the mic, please. Yes, ma'am. And the gentleman with the white hat that you just passed, I think it's a gentleman. Can't see quite with lights. Come on down, sir. That's you, right there. Oh, it's a ma'am. Okay, sorry. The lights are right smack in my eyes. Sorry about that.
Oh. Hi, Congressman Panetta. I'm Levon Stone, Executive Director of the Fort Ord Environmental Justice Network. And I'm here because we still have a big concern about environmental justice as part of the environment, which is looking after the people, especially the local people in our communities. We still have a lot of problems with housing. We have all these very expensive housing being built all over Fort Ord that nobody that I know can afford. We're still looking at our veterans getting some little help, but they're not getting a lot of help. And they also need housing. We're also still dealing with racial issues in our country and on the peninsula. And so I'm just wondering, where does that all fit in the agenda in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Stone, and it's good to see you. I appreciate you being here. I think when it comes to environmental justice, it's a big issue, and I think part of the ways that can be addressed is infrastructure investment. Because obviously, the last time the California water system was updated was, I think, back in the 60s. It's been a long time. And imagine, the last thing we want is another Detroit episode here in California. And that takes an infrastructure investment. Now, we're seeing California once again taking the lead in regards to infrastructure investment. But I do believe it's time for the U.S. government to do the same thing. I was actually hopeful when Donald Trump mentioned a $1 trillion investment right out of the chute, right after he got inaugurated. That's what he started to talk about, is infrastructure investment. But nothing's happened. I believe that that's something that Democrats and Republicans can agree upon. I believe that that's some legislation that we can actually pass and would actually be good for the president. But he's distracted with all these other things, unfortunately. And I believe that that's something we can continue to work on. Now, let me talk to you about veterans. Veterans is an area, as you have seen and if you've heard about, the support of our veterans clearly is a bipartisan issue. And I can explain exactly why. We've had a number of pieces of legislation passed the House recently dealing with support for our veterans. One, the Clear Choice Act, which basically allows veterans to go to a private care facility if they cannot get, if there are long lines waiting. Now, fortunately, let me digress real quick. This morning, I was at the opening of the DOD VA Healthcare, General Gurley Healthcare Clinic. And it was unbelievable to see the services that our local veterans are going to be receiving. Thanks to Congressman Sam Farr. Thanks to the men and women of our services. But there are other areas, as we've heard about, where our veterans are not getting proper care, and so this legislation will help them. Two, we've passed the GI Bill Forever Act. That's a bill that basically says no longer do you have just 15 years to take advantage of your GI benefits. You can do it for however long the rest of your life. You deserve those benefits. You can use it whenever you want. That's the second piece of legislation. We've expedited the appellate process. If there are benefits that you feel that you've been improperly rejected for, then basically you have a right to appeal. The problem is right now there's years and years. It takes up to 5 years sometimes to have that appeal addressed. We've expedited that process by saying that if you have evidence to present to the appellate process, you're in another queue, and it expedites your time waiting. And the fourth thing is we've basically made it easier. If there's toxic employees within the VA, we've made it easier to terminate them, but also at the same time we've made it easier for the Secretary of the VA to hire deputy directors. And those are bills that have pretty much been passed unanimously in the House, Democrats and Republicans, and let's just hope that the Senate does the same thing. So veterans is an area, I'm glad to say, that a care for our U.S. veterans is an area where the House is coming together and actually passing legislation.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Maureen Smith from Aptos, California, for the last 41 years. I know, Congressman Panetta, that you've just returned from Israel on a AIPAC-sponsored trip. That's American-Israeli Political Action Committee. I also know that you're a co-sponsor of a piece of legislation that criminalizes businesses for boycotting Israel, that has fines from $250,000 to $1 million and 20 years in prison. And you disagree. You wrote to me saying that you don't agree with the ACLU that has pointed out how this is against the First Amendment of the Constitution. I have a really hard time with that, and I'd like to know when you are going to go to Palestine on a trip sponsored by your constituents, especially the churches that are divesting from Israel, either yourself or staff, so that you can hear what the other side has to say in this situation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Appreciate that.
A challenging question.
Yeah, no, it actually, it's a good question. I appreciate it, but I can tell you, based on my experience in Israel, where it was sponsored by the American Israeli Education Fund, that I actually visited Palestine, and I met with Palestinian leadership, and we drove to Ramallah, and we met with the Minister of Finance, and we talked to him, and I actually asked him point blank, how do you feel about the boycott, divestment, and sanction that could happen to you? And he said, that's the last thing we want here. We don't want that to happen, because when you do BDS against Israel, you're doing it against us. That's what he said. That every single person I spoke to, and I made sure to ask about this issue in Israel. And like I said, we spoke with Palestinian leadership, we spoke with people in the Israeli leadership, we spoke with people in the LGBTQ community, we spoke with the labor movement, we spoke with the Labor Party, we spoke with a Arab advisor to the Arab group in the Knesset, their form of the Congress there in Israel. I asked each person about BDS, and every single person said, don't do it. It will hurt us. Now, in regards to the legislation that you've brought up, H.R. 1697, a bipartisan bill where you have over 60 Democrats and over 60 Republicans just co-sponsoring, not even voting for it, just co-sponsoring this bill. That is a bill that basically all that does is it amends the Export Administration Act of 1977. Can I see a show of hands of who's heard of the Export Administration Act? One person, 2, 3, 4. Good. That's great. I'm impressed. I didn't. I admit, I did not. The Export Administration Act of 1977 was passed as legislation to deal with the Arab boycott of Israel at that time. And all that legislation, and what it does, is it prevents participation in unsanctioned boycotts by foreign governments. That's all it does. It is the current law. It deals with commercial activity and commercial speech, and it is constitutionally upheld within our courts. It went to the courts back in the 70s, and the federal courts upheld that legislation. What 1697 does is amends it. And all it adds is international government organizations to that. That's it. That's all it does. It's very targeted. It's very narrow. So you, as individuals, can boycott, sanction Israel. You, if you own companies, your own companies, you can boycott, you can sanction, you can divest from Israel. It does not prevent you from doing that. If that's what you want to do, then that's what you're going to do, and you can do that. It does not say you cannot do that. Now, I firmly believe that there's no way I would sponsor, I would vote for, I would support legislation that infringes on our constitutional rights. I would not do that. I would not do that. I'm going to continue to learn about this bill. I will. I met with people this weekend, 2 professors that were against me for co-sponsoring it. I met with them. I got their points of view. I want to continue to learn about it, and I will continue to learn about it. And if something comes up where it's determined that it's against free speech, trust me, I'll be the first to remove my sponsorship from it. But at this point, based on what I've learned about the bill, I've read the bill. I've read the ACLU letter. I've talked to numerous people for and against it. I've had the fortunate opportunity to travel to Israel and talk to both sides, people in Palestine, people in Israel, people in the West Bank, people in leadership of both sides. And right now, that is the conclusion that I'm drawing. But I'm going to continue to learn about the bill, just like and I hope all of you continue to learn about the situation that's going on in Israel.
Thank you. The 2 people in the back row right there, please come down, and then I'll move to the central section. So I'll get to you guys next.
Okay. Hello, I'm Michael Bear from Monterey,
hey, Michael.
California. Hi.
Good to see you.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. I saw you at Fora
Correct.
on Friday, and you expressed a strong desire to work on Obamacare, but then ultimately to achieve Medicare for all, single payer. I don't know if you're aware, Bill HR 676 is exactly that. I encourage you to support it and co-sponsor it. Maybe you already have, I don't know. I understand it has 114 co-sponsors. My second question, another bill is HR 48. You already spoke about the need to overturn Citizens United. Once the Supreme Court rules, the only way to, we have checks and balances, but the only check on the Supreme Court is through constitutional amendment or getting them to reverse their decision. HR 48 is a We the People bill. There's the move to amend the 28th Amendment. I'd like to leave this brochure with you. And as a 28th Amendment, it would eliminate personhood from corporations and all the rights that the Constitution gives to persons. And it would also declare that money is not speech. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you.
Michael, in regards to HR 676, I am a co-sponsor. I've been a co-sponsor. Look, thank you. I think that universal health care is something we should shoot for. It's unfortunate that it wasn't put forward as a part of the ACA, but the fact is that they needed to compromise. They needed to pass the ACA, and let me tell you, fortunately for the people here on the Central Coast, we have benefited tremendously from the ACA. Nationally, we know 20 million people have got insurance because of the ACA. Monterey County, before the ACA, was 57th out of 58 in uninsured. The uninsured rate after the ACA dropped from 21% to 9% because of the ACA. In the roundtables that I had on it early on in my term back in January and February, we heard from a number of health clinics and hospitals where they've actually created jobs because of the ACA. The ACA is a good thing. But you know what? The ACA also needs repairs, because I also heard from people who talked about how expensive it is, how cumbersome it is, how burdensome it is. It doesn't need to be repealed. It cannot be repealed, and I'm glad that Congress did not repeal it, and I'll continue to fight for that. But it does need to be fixed. Yes, I support universal health care, but for now we need to make sure that that individual market is upheld, because it's gonna falter, unfortunately, based on what's been happening this year, based on the statements by President Trump, based on the fact that he may not make those payments to the cost reduction subsidies. It may falter. And so I believe it's incumbent upon Congress, Democrats and Republicans, to get to the table and actually try to figure out something that can help the ACA survive and prevent it from basically the individual market faltering. That's very important, and that's why I'm proud to be a part of that problem solvers. That's actually Democrats and Republicans working together on an issue that's so important to our country, so important to the Central Coast of California, and I'm going to continue to do that. In regards to the other bill, 48, I'm not familiar with it. I will look into that, Michael, and we'll get back to you. Thank you very much for bringing that to my attention.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Riley Hanna, and I recently moved to Salinas Toro Park area from right outside of Washington, D.C.
Welcome.
So thank you. So my question for you is that the Salinas Valley has been given the title of the salad bowl of the world due to the bounteous agricultural industry. However, unsustainable agricultural practices have a multitude of negative environmental impacts, such as wasteful water usage, which is pretty crucial due to the drought in California that's happening, runoff of inorganic fertilizers causing waterways to degrade, and habitat loss for native species, and many more. How will you as a congressman promote sustainable inorganic agriculture to protect our personal health and the environment in which we live? Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that question. You're right. I think many people here understand that agriculture by far is our #1 industry on the Central Coast. It brings in over $9 billion to this area. That's our #1 industry by far. Second is hospitality at about $3.5 billion. It provides 100,000 jobs for people here on the Central Coast. And I'm proud when I stand up in being a member of the Agriculture Committee. I promise you, if you ask my fellow members, where's Jimmy Panetta from, they will tell you he's from the salad bowl of the world. Because I always make it a point to say that, because I want people to know about it. But you're right. There are issues, obviously, in dealing with water and pesticides and other issues that can affect our environment. Now, fortunately, though, we have people in agriculture here who understand that. I want you to, Eric Loretzen is the Agriculture Commissioner here. We are ahead of the curve in Monterey County in dealing with these issues. Trust me, we can always do better. We know that, and we're going to strive to do better. But, you see people like Eric Loretzen working with Juan Aranga, a farm worker advocate, coming together to talk about certain issues. That's why the farm workers now carry a card warning them about what has happened. That's why there's signage in the fields warning farm workers about any sort of pesticide use or any sort of issues that come up with that. I believe here in Monterey County, we're ahead of the curve. There's always something we can do. In regards to water, what's been great and what we've seen, because we are an area that does not import our water. Our water, 95% of it comes pretty much straight from the ground. We save it in our reservoirs and we suck it out of the ground. That means we basically, unfortunately, having to live drought to drought to drought. But our farmers have advanced, and they've used technology to make sure that we don't waste water. And part of that is basically cutting down on sprinklers and doing drip irrigation. That's why you see a lot of the tubes, exactly, in drip irrigation. They're doing that with fertilizer as well, so that they're not just, spreading it everywhere, but they're putting it right on the seed, right on the root. And so that prevents a lot of the runoff. It prevents a lot of the contamination. Now, there's always more we can do, and we will continue to do more, and I will make sure that we continue to do more. But there's great advances in technology that are being done and will continue to be done, especially with Silicon Valley right over the way. I know Salinas Valley and Silicon Valley are partnering up to work on issues just like that, and I will be a big proponent of that. When it comes to organics, we are so lucky to be in an area that is responsible for so much organic agriculture. So much so that myself, Sherry Penegry, a Democrat from Maine, and Dan Newhouse, a Republican from Washington, have co-authored a bill to make sure that there's 50 million more for organic produce and organic production, and that's in the pipes right now. Because you're right, organic is not only healthy, but it's great for the environment, and you're seeing more and more conventional agriculture people move to organic as well, and I want to promote that too.
Thank you. Coming back to the center. Yes, ma'am, in the blue, and the person in the black shirt right in front of her. Yes, if you two would come right over here. Yes. And while you make your way to the microphone, there are two, in the age of social media, we have two YouTube questions. Let me ask you this. A constituent from Monterey said, can you help with federal funding for low-cost housing for seniors, especially for those on Social Security?
Yeah. No, look, I think we all understand that there is a housing crisis here on the Central Coast. The average cost of a house in Monterey is, I think, close to $600,000. In Santa Cruz County, it's over $800,000 for a home. It's very difficult to live here, and you want people who have lived here, who have grown up here. You want to be able to make sure that they can continue staying here. Fortunately, there are people locally who are coming up with good ideas when it comes to housing. They are basing the Monterey Bay Economic MBEP, Monterey Bay Economic Program, I think it's called, MBEP, run by Bud Colligan, was a big investor in it. They've started a housing trust, a Monterey Bay Housing Trust. And what a housing trust is basically taking money in, providing for seconds, and basically soft seconds, and also helping pay off the underlying foundational payment, the initial payment. That's a housing trust. That's very important. The Silicon Valley has one. Now Monterey County and the Central Coast will have one as well. We need to look at the USDA for grants, that they can provide grants for housing in our agricultural areas. We need to look at multi-use housing so that there are investors who are willing to build housing that not only has apartments above it, but also retail sales as well. And as from the federal point of view, there has to be more tax credits for developers. 9% and 4% tax credits help out developers tremendously, and that's what I hope to continue to do in Congress.
Thank you. Yes, our next question right here on the left, the ma'am in the, yes, ma'am.
Okay. My name's Casey Cortez, and I'm 13. I have several questions.
Okay.
One of them is you talk about all these great, bills that you've passed, but I never hear about them, and I read the New York Times and the local paper, and I just never hear about these things. It sounds great, but I would like to know before.
Yeah. No, look, I think that's right, and that's a problem. That's a problem. The fact that all we're hearing, in the press, a lot of the time, they like to put forward the partisanship, unfortunately, in dealing with these big bills. But I can tell you that there are a lot of times when I walk on the House floor and I look up and I see a lot of green on the wall. What I mean by that is if you've ever been to the House of Representatives and seen a vote take place, all our names up are on the, I guess it would be the south wall above the Speaker's chair. And it shows how we're voting, yes or no. Yes is green, no is red. Don't get me wrong, there are plenty of times where you see red and green, and it's very partisan. But there's a number of bills, and if you look on my website, every Friday I've asked that we post the bills that have been passed on a bipartisan basis. And they're there, and that's why I spoke of the veterans bills, because more people need to know about that. That yes, you're hearing a lot of partisanship going on, especially when it comes to health care. You're going to hear it coming up when it comes about budget and tax reform. But I can tell you there are bills getting passed like my a Clear Creek bill. The bill that I put forward, thanks to Congressman Sam Farr, who laid the foundation, we were able to put forward this bill and have it passed unanimously in the House, got it out of the Natural Resources Committee, then it passed unanimously in the House, and now it's on to the Senate. That's going to provide 60,000 acres, open up Clear Creek management area to off-road vehicles down in the San Benito County, and then preserve another 20,000 of San Joaquin wilderness down there at the same time. These are bills that, nobody's going to hear about it, and it does take effort. The press isn't putting them forward, but I can tell you, if you go to my website, you'll see the bills that have been passed by Congress.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Caspian Forsyth from Monterey. My question has to do with Puerto Rico. Last year they voted in a pro-statehood government and then recently held a referendum in which a vast proportion of the electorate voted for statehood. Just last month, I believe, they sent a delegation of famous Puerto Ricans to agitate for statehood in Congress. And I'm just wondering what your stance is on statehood for Puerto Rico and its 4 million people.
Yeah, no, I've actually, I appreciate that question. I've actually met with, they had people come to, as they call it, storm the Hill, or, certain groups come to the Hill and they visit all members of Congress. And I met with several people, one being from Puerto Rico, and they talked to me about the issues there. And that's something I admit to you, I'm still looking into that. I know that, I think that the tide has kind of changed as to what the locals in Puerto Rico, what the Puerto Ricans want, and they're very concerned that their voices aren't being heard, was the message that I got. And so I've heard them, but I need to continue to research that bill, to be frank with you, in order to have a proper answer for you. But what I'd like for you to do is, if you could please, you see people that are part of my staff here, if you could give us your contact information after, and this way we can continue to update you on my stance on that bill.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, sir. Right here. And yes, ma'am, right there. Yes, if you'd like to go to that side, and you could go to that one. And while they come to the microphone, we have a question from Facebook this time. You talked earlier about ag. There's also an intersection between ag and immigration and having enough workers here in this county. The question is, how are you going to convince Republican colleagues to work with you on immigration reform?
Yeah, look, immigration has been my number one issue. It was my number one issue throughout the campaign. It's been my number one issue as a freshman representative there. Why? Because it is something that is important to all of us, not just on the Central Coast, but throughout our country. The last time we had immigration reform was when? I heard it over here, 1986 with Ronald Reagan. Congress has failed to do anything on immigration. We got close back in 2001, but then 9/11 happened. We got close again in 2006 under George W. Bush, but it got put off the table. And the closest I think we've been is in 2013, when the Senate, in an overwhelming majority, passed Senate Bill 744, a comprehensive immigration reform package that dealt with border security, but a smart way to go about doing it, not just building a wall, in regards to upping technology, upping boots on the ground, more sensors, more video, smart ways to go about securing our border. It dealt with a visa program, making sure that there are workers who want to come here, who want to work here, and making sure that they're legal here. And then, of course, it dealt with a pathway to citizenship, but a very difficult pathway to citizenship, a 13-year pathway to citizenship, where the first 6 years, you're a registered immigrant. After 10 years, you're a legal immigrant. And then when you get to 13 years, once you've learned English, once you've paid for your certain fines and fees, once you've shown your employment history, once you've shown your housing history, then you can apply to become a citizen. A pretty damn difficult pathway to citizenship. But that was compromise. That was compromise, where Republicans and Democrats came together, and I believe that that's the framework that we have to work in. So much so, I understand how important immigration is to this area. Now, for the past 4 or 5 years, when I've been out and about speaking with men and women in agriculture, farmers and farm workers, you would think, especially since we suffered a pretty severe drought, you would think that water would be the number one issue. Every single time I talk to anybody, let me tell you what the number one issue is: immigration and immigration reform. And that's why when I got there, I wrote a letter and had it co-authored by Jim Costa, Democrat from the Central Valley, Jeff Denham, Republican from the Central Valley, and David Valadao, Republican from the Central Valley. And we sent it to the president, trying to explain to him how important immigration and immigration reform is to our agriculture. Now, I don't know if he read it. He probably didn't. But the fact is that that was just the first step, and basically bringing Democrats and Republicans together.
Yes. Now, was it more than 140 characters?
Yeah, that's right.
I couldn't resist.
That's right. No, understandable. Understandable. But there are 2-3 pieces of legislation, unfortunately, being piecemealed through the House and Senate. The first one that came forward was put forward by Dianne Feinstein, called the Blue Card Bill. And then Luis Gutierrez from Chicago in the House, same bill, focusing on making sure that the agricultural workforce that we have here, which unfortunately is shrinking and aging. I think 60% of our ag workers are over 50 years old. Yeah, that's right. There is a lack of agriculture, a lack of workers coming that are here. And we need to make sure that we keep them here. And that's what this Blue Card Bill does. Now, unfortunately, it just has Democratic sponsorship. Another piece of bill that's going to be coming down when I get back in September is put forward by the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Goodlatte is his last name. And I have not been able to see that bill. They pretty much kept it pretty tight, unfortunately. But I think there are certain areas that are good, and I think there are certain areas that are bad from what I've heard about it. And then you heard about this RAISE Act that the president and Tom Cotton and Perdue from Georgia put forward, where they talk about just bringing in skilled and people who only speak English to this country. And yeah, exactly. But what you hope is that these pieces of legislation get on the table, and you hope that we can work together. I think in dealing with that issue, though, it's a two-angle process. One is dealing with immigration reform. We have to do something. We must. Unfortunately or unfortunately, there are pieces coming forward, as I've talked about. And hopefully we can get to the framework of 744, that comprehensive bill I talked about. But at the same time, in order to deal with the lack of labor that's affecting our agriculture, and you talk to people in agriculture, they're telling you they're letting fields go fallow, unpicked, because they don't have the labor force to do it. We have specialty crops here. Crops that take that human sight, sense, feel, touch to actually pick from the field, put into a carton, and goes right into the containers that go to our store and goes right into my daughter's mouth. I mean, that's why you need humans to do it here with our broccoli, with our strawberries, with our raspberries. We've relied on our labor force. But there's a lack of labor force to do it now. So where we got to go? We got to look at mechanization as well. We got to look at technology to deal with this issue. And that's why on the Ag Committee, a number of people are talking about it. Not to replace labor, but to deal with the lack of labor that we're facing right here. And so on the Ag Committee, I hope to work on a specialty crop research initiative in the upcoming 2018 Farm Bill that also deals with mechanization and hopefully getting some block grants to basically make sure that the Salinas Valley and Silicon Valley are working towards more technological advances when it comes to not just water, not just pesticide use, but also harvesting their crops.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question, Mr. Congressman. My name is Michaela Braveman. I'm 55 years old, self-employed. I live in Pacific Grove. Been there since 1992. My question is a follow-up question to healthcare. Yeah. I've been a big proponent of Obamacare, and in many aspects I am still. However, I have found as a self-employed individual living here, it has majorly backfired. At least for me, I'm above the subsidy, even though at times, given my income level, that it can fluctuate. It's been less or more. However, pretty much what I found when Obamacare came about, my Blue Shield plan was canceled. I went on the exchange. I found the option that was available to me cost me 3 times what I paid before. The deductible was ×4, and the providership went way down. Since then, over the years, the premiums went up and up and up. Yeah. And I just got this lovely letter from Anthem Blue Cross canceling me a second time for 2018. I know I'm not the only one. There's many, many people who are in this particular situation. I want to really applaud and encourage you for fighting for Medicare for all. Yeah. Thank you for doing that. Yeah. But in the meantime, given the disarray and the crisis that we're having and the markets folding, I'm wondering what can be done locally for people that might allow us, and is there anything that you can help assist or bring about individuals like myself so we can form groups or have some stability or some knowledge that when 2018 runs around, we have health care and we're not sitting with nothing.
Thank you for that. That's, that you hear the cry for the urgency. We hear a lot of discussion and a possibility of ideas, but is there something that could be done sooner?
Yeah. Look, I think it's, it's important that you continue to tell your story. I do believe that more people need to understand that. I heard this throughout the campaign. I mean, like I said, I didn't hear about the number two thing I heard most about on the campaign trail beyond immigration was the ACA. And unfortunately, it was about people who were dissatisfied with it, unfortunately. It wasn't until people started to realize it could be repealed that people started talking up about it and the good things about it. But this story is common. You're not alone. And that's why I've always said it needs to not be repealed, but needs to be repaired. And some of the ways we can look at are make sure that there are cost reduction savings, that's mandatory rather than up to the whim of the president and the government. It needs to be mandatory. We need to make sure that there's reinsurance so that insurance providers have the subsidies necessary to cover high-value patients that are sick a lot, that cost a lot, and basically that need to be covered. The third thing is looking at the employer mandate as well, making sure that, in my discussions with research services, talking about the employer mandate, that has not helped that much. And it's very difficult for these small businesses to keep up with the paperwork to provide that insurance. And so basically looking at what the number is for the employer mandate. And the fourth thing is we need to make sure that we have to, make sure there's more incentives for other states to innovate. It's very important. We're lucky in California because of Covered California, but we have to make sure that there are other states that can continue to innovate when it comes to their healthcare needs. I can't, and I'll be frank, I don't know if something can be done sooner at the national level when it comes to our healthcare. But I can tell you that we are going to try. We're going to try to protect people like you and to make sure that the people here who have benefited from the ACA, that they also continue to have their insurance and their health care as well.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Oh, yes, sir. I couldn't see you behind there.
Good evening. I'm David Rojas, and I live in the great city of Delray Oaks.
Great.
I have become disturbed about the great tweeter concern about our national monuments and that he's reviewing them.
Yeah.
As a professional painter and a photographer, I have been through the Southwest, and I have known the Navajo people, and I really respect them. All you have to do is go to Mesa Verde or Chaco Canyon, and you see those monuments are preserved. There is one monument that is not, and it suffers some danger. That is Bear's Ears. It's in the lower corner of Utah. And I was talking to some of those Navajo people who live there, and they're concerned about their treasures being stolen, abused, destroyed, and I would hope that you would be able to gather some of the support to get that tweeter to change his mind. Thank you.
No, thank you, David. I appreciate that. Look, obviously, I was very concerned when that executive order came out, as I discussed in a previous answer, to make sure that our sanctuaries and our monuments here on the Central Coast are protected. Fortunately, or unfortunately, how you look at it, in regards to the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, the only part of that sanctuary that's subject to this executive order is the Davidson Seamount, if you've ever heard of that. It's an area southwest of here, and a seamount that comes up that has a lot of amazing wildlife and natural flora, fauna, basically underwater sea life on it. And that has been added to the National Marine Sanctuary, I think, back in 2008. And so that's the only section that's subject in our sanctuary. But fortunately, and I've spoken to Noah about this, and I've spoken to a number of people who are very familiar with this David Seamount, there's not much oil there, thank God. But that, nevertheless, that's not going to stop us, and it shouldn't stop you from writing in, telling them how important our National Marine Sanctuary is to us. Now, the two committees I'm on in Washington, D.C., one is the Ag Committee, the second one is the Armed Services Committee. I was just appointed to that within the last couple of weeks. The committee I was on before that was the Natural Resources Committee. And I heard a lot about Bears Ears. The chairman is from Utah. And let me tell you, the Natural Resources Committee, unlike the Ag Committee, unlike the Armed Services Committee, unfortunately is very partisan. And the votes that came down on the Bears Ears and other national monument dealing with that were very partisan. You had all the Republicans voting one way and all the Democrats voting the other, unfortunately. And so that's where I can tell you, I admit, I had not heard of Bears Ears until I sat on the Natural Resources Committee, until unfortunately we had witnesses come forward and talk about how they want to basically remove the designation. There were, minority is allowed one witness in this hearing, and it was from someone from a local tribe, and he talked about the importance of it. Fortunately enough to where Democrats heard it, Republicans heard it, but at least he was on record supporting Bears Ears. That's going to be an issue. It's going to be an issue, but as I'm trying to convey to you, it's an issue on partisan lines, unfortunately. And unless the Democrats get back the majority in 2018, I can't tell you what's going to happen up to then. Yeah, there you go.
Well,
Thank you.
We've spent almost our entire hour. For those who know me, I'm sure they will tell you this is the quietest they've ever seen me for this length of time, ever, perhaps in my life. So I'm going to have one moderator's prerogative and ask the last question, if I might. As an attorney, I'm very concerned about recent challenges to the integrity of sitting judges and representatives of the Justice Department. These are two of the foundations of our justice system. Lack of trust in these institutions places our country, our democracy, and our freedom at risk. What is the role of Congress? What can be done in reinforcing the strength and trust in both our judicial system and our system of justice? An easy one to end.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. Leave it to the law professor. Look, I think, judges are, I'm a little biased here. I'm married to a judge, okay? So, I think judges clearly have the discretion to do what's necessary within the law when they sentence people. I think, the case that you may be referring to is the Brock Turner case, unfortunately, in Santa Clara County, where Brock Turner went to trial and was found guilty of rape and was sentenced to probation, a very lenient sentence. And so there are a number of people who want to recall this judge as they move forward. Now, look, this judge was within his right to issue that sentence. That's what people have to know. It was at his discretion to do that. But it doesn't mean someone can run against him. It doesn't mean someone can run against him. Judges are up for election. And I'm sure he's going to have someone run against him, I can tell you, because of that sentence. Now, I think when it comes to Congress and the federal level, obviously we can deal with issues that, make it, you can give judges more discretion to sentence people or give them less discretion, especially when it comes to the sentencing laws. And so that's something that, we can look at to make sure that, it's within their authority to do something like that. But right now, as a judge who is either appointed by the governor or elected by the citizens or appointed through the federal process, they have the ability and the discretion to act in whichever way they can within the law. And so if we're going to change that law, that's something that Congress can do, but I don't see that happening when it comes to that.
Thank you. So before we leave tonight, I'd like to welcome and thank a couple of our local electeds and officials who are here this evening. Lou Bauman, CEO of Monterey County. Lou, welcome. Thank you for being here. Dave Pacheco, Seaside City Council. Easy for me to say. Dave, I saw you earlier. Good to see you. Bill Peak from Pacific Grove. Toby Marcus and Alex Pitaro from Senator Bill Monning's office, and Bruce Delgado from the city of Marina. Welcome and thank you for being here. Congressman,
thank you.
The last word is yours.
Look, once again, I can't stress enough that your participation at this point is very, very important. In January and February, I think we all know how we felt back then. And I can tell you my office and my staff definitely knew how you felt. We have been inundated with calls, emails, walk-ins, you name it. I mean, let me just give you a number. Last year, the congressman's office from this district received 40,000 inquiries, 40,000 contacts, informational contacts into the office the whole year for 12 months. It's been 8 months. We've received 77,000 comments. But that's right. Exactly. That's a good thing. Just promise me you'll continue to do it come 2018. We need to make sure that we're excited, we're invigorated come the 2018 election, and of course in the 2020 election. So please continue to participate, continue to speak out, continue to contact my office, no matter what it is. My staff is going to kill me for saying that, but do me a favor. We want to hear from you. I want to hear from you so that I can continue to have the evidence to be sure that I fight for you. And I promise you that's what I'll continue to do. Thank you very much again for being here tonight. I look forward to continuing to serve you. Thank you.
A reminder that you're welcome to put your additional questions in the box in the lobby, and the congressman and his staff will get back to you. I'd encourage, you're welcome to stay and mingle. Thank you very much. Come on.
cool if I get kicked.